We're on part 2, the Play-Doh joints of your Chapter 9 lab. And you have pictures in your book, but pictures are only two-dimensional. They don't do it justice. With some of these things, you really just need to see it in 3D. So we use Play-Doh to make the cartilage and the tendons and ligaments and whatnot, and we have the bones here, and we actually construct some of these joints. So you can see in 3D what these pictures show you as only flat two-dimensional pictures. So we'll begin with the labrum of the hip and the shoulder. So remember from the notes, labrum occurs in the ball and socket joints. So the hip and the shoulder are the two ball and socket joints. And a labrum is a piece of fibrocartilage that lines the socket. So here is the hip, and the orange Play-Doh there is the labrum. So you can see the hip has a socket, the acetabellum, and then the labrum is this piece of Play-Doh that I put in here that represents fibrocartilage, and it lines the socket. Here is the head of the femur, and when these go together, the labrum is there to help hold them in together. The same with the shoulder. You have the glenoid cavity on the scapula, you have the head of the humerus, the orange Play-Doh there is the labrum that helps to hold them together. Then we move on to the knee. The knee is the most complex joint in the body. So we're going to begin with the menisci. And you need to follow along with this page in your book and carefully read the descriptions. So if we come down here to the part about the menisci, it says a pair of C-shaped fibrocartilage pads positioned on the condyles of the tibia. Okay, so remember, fibrocartilage is very soft and squishy. It's used for cushioning. And your knee takes a lot of impact. Like when you walk or run or jump, that's enormous amounts of impact on your knee. So you need the menisci to provide cushioning in there. So I have the menisci in this light blue. So now remember, it says they are on the condyles of the tibia. So first let's identify the tibia. So here's the tibia, the bottom weight-bearing bone in the leg. The condyles are these areas here. And then here are the menisci. So you have a meniscus here and a meniscus here. They're C-shaped. And then when we have the femur, and you can see here, they provide that cushioning. So when you're upright, you have the femur and the tibia hitting together when you're walking and running and jumping, and they provide cushioning there. Next, we can look at the collateral ligaments. So remember, lateral means sides. And if we look up here, we have collateral ligaments are on the sides. And you can see them in the picture here too. So you have a collateral ligament that attaches the femur to the tibia. So that's your tibial collateral ligament. You have another one that attaches the femur to the fibula. So that one would be your fibular collateral ligament. And those are pretty easy to see in the picture here. So you have the tibial one goes from the femur to the tibia. The fibular one goes from the femur to the fibula. Next, we have the quadriceps femoris tendon. So this one can be a little tricky. So if we come up here and we read about this, we have both the quadriceps femoris tendon and the patellar ligament. We're going to come back to the cruciate ligaments. We're going to do those last. Okay, so if you read here, if you notice right here, we're kind of skipping to the middle of this paragraph. The patella is embedded within this tendon. That's our first clue we want to look at. The patella is embedded within this tendon. And if you look at this picture, you can see the patella is inside there. So it's kind of like a jelly donut. So I have this here. There's the patella inside. It's embedded within. So that's one thing that kind of gives students trouble at first, is realizing that the patella is inside there. So when you've properly made it out of your Play-Doh, I shouldn't be able to see the patella unless I open this up. So the patella is like the jelly in a jelly donut. And an interesting thing, babies don't have kneecaps. The next time you're around a little baby, take a look at their knees. There's no kneecap there. Your kneecap develops as a sesamoid bone when you start crawling and walking. So it develops in response to the stress and the pressure put on the knee when you start crawling and walking. And it grows within that tendon. So it starts out really small, and the more you crawl and walk, the bigger it gets when you're a child. It doesn't just keep getting bigger forever. Okay, and this is what goes from the femur to the tibia. So we can place it right here. And see, this matches our picture. Now notice we have one structure, right? It's just one thing that starts up here at the femur and it comes down here to the tibia, and you have the patella embedded there in the middle. But it has two names. The top part is called the quadriceps femoris tendon. The bottom part is the patellar ligament. So think about the difference between a tendon and a ligament. A tendon goes from muscle to bone. So notice up here we have the quadriceps femoris muscle. So up here at the top you have muscle, and then you have the patella, which is bone. So the top portion of it is called a tendon because it's between a muscle and a bone. The bottom portion is from the patella to the tibia. So that's bone to bone. So that's why the bottom portion is called a ligament, but it's actually one big structure. So here we have, this would be the tendon. This part is the ligament, and you have the patella embedded inside there. Okay, now we'll go back to the cruciate ligaments. The cruciate ligaments are the toughest part. They are the most challenging, and you have to carefully read in the book what it says about them. Okay, so the cruciate ligaments are deep to the articular capsule. So remember, the articular capsule surrounds the outside of a joint. So deep to means that they're going to be inside. So the cruciate ligaments are going to be inside the knee joint. You're not going to see them from the outside. Okay, they limit the movement of the femur on the tibia. So what that means, when you're up and walking around, you want the femur to stay on top of the tibia. You don't want it sliding forward or sliding backwards. You want it to just stay there. So they keep it there, the femur on top of the tibia. They don't let it slide around like this. Okay, these ligaments cross each other in the form of an X, hence the name cruciate, which means cross. So I have them here in pink. So we know that they're going to make an X shape. So when we're all done, we should be able to see an X. Now, a place where a lot of students get messed up is they think that they should see the X from the front. A lot of times students will do this, and they'll say this is their cruciate ligament. Well, that's wrong for two reasons. One, that's not deep. Remember, we said it has to be inside the knee joint. It's deep to the articular capsule. Another is you're not going to see the X from the front view. We're going to have a side view of the X. Okay, now here's where we have to read carefully. The anterior cruciate ligament extends from the posterior femur to the anterior side of the tibia. So here's our legs, our bones laying here. I've got, this is the anterior up on top, got the posterior on the bottom. Remember, we need it to extend from the posterior femur to the anterior side of the tibia. So our ACL is going to go from the posterior femur. So I'm sticking one end of my Play-Doh back here on the back side of the femur to the anterior side of the tibia. So it goes there. There's the ACL. It goes from the back of the femur to the front of the tibia. Then we can keep reading. The posterior cruciate ligament runs from the anterior inferior. So what they did there is they put two words together, anterior and inferior. So that means front bottom of the femur to the posterior side of the tibia. So here's our posterior cruciate ligament, anterior inferior. Think back to chapter 1 when you learn these terms. Anterior, front, inferior, the bottom. So right there. And it extends to the posterior side of the tibia. So we put the other end of it back here on the back of the tibia. Now, the X is there on the inside, and you see the X or the cross when you look at it from the side view, the lateral view. So there are your cruciate ligaments. They run from the fronts and backs of the tibia and the femur. And they hold the tibia and the femur together like this, so they prevent this forward and backward movement so that the femur stays positioned over the tibia. And you hear a lot about athletes tearing these because if, you know how like when you straighten your leg, it stops here? Well, if you're playing a sport and you get hit or you fall and you land a certain way, it can force your knee to bend backwards. Or you can land or fall a certain way, like you can only bend your knee so far if you bend your knee too much. So they get torn in sports by the knee either bending backwards, hyperextending, or the knee bending too much, hyperflexing. Right? And it talks about that here.